The silver arrow sang through the winter air, and Cale knew it was meant for his heart. He stood at the cliff's edge where the pines gave way to nothing, where the kingdom's hunters had finally cornered him after 3 winters of running. The curse had hollowed him from the inside, his wolf starved, his mind fractured between rage and the desperate need for absolution. An alpha king, reduced to a ghost, haunting the frozen peaks. The arrow was mercy, he thought. It was faster than the slow death the curse promised. But mercy didn't come from the hunter's bows. It came from her. She emerged from the snowdrift like a vision the dying conjure. Small, almost translucent in the moonlight, her breath forming frost flowers in the air. An omega, rejected. He could taste the abandonment on her like copper, could feel the fractures in her bond running deeper than any scar. Yet she moved toward him with the kind of certainty that defied logic. "Run!" he rasped, his voice raw from disuse. "They're here for me, not—" She didn't run. Instead, she stepped directly into the arrow's path. The shaft struck her shoulder, and the sound she made wasn't a scream. It was something older, something that belonged to the howling wind and the crying stars. She crumpled into the snow between him and the hunters, and Cale felt something in his fractured chest fracture further. The hunters hesitated. Silver arrows were meant for cursed alphas, not fragile omegas. There was no honor in what they'd done, and they knew it. That hesitation was all Cale needed. His wolf erupted, not in rage, but in purpose. He shifted in a spray of silver light, his form massive and terrible, and he stood over her bleeding body like a king reclaiming his throne. His eyes locked with the lead hunters, and in that gaze was a promise older than kingdoms. Touch her, and I will end you in ways your bloodline will remember for generations. The hunters retreated. When Cale's human form returned, his hands were shaking as he gathered her against his chest. The arrow had gone deep, but it had missed the artery, a miracle he didn't deserve but would steal anyway. "Why?" he whispered into her hair, which smelled of ash and something sweet, like flowers that bloomed in the dark. She opened her eyes. They were gray as winter starlight, and her voice came out barely audible. "Because," she said, "you looked like you were finally ready to stop running." He carried her into the mountain's heart, into a cave where ancient fire still burned in stone bowls, where the old magic still remembered how to heal. As he drew the arrow from her flesh, as he bound her wound with strips of cloth torn from his own cloak, as he held her through the fever that came in waves, Cale made a vow that would either redeem him or destroy them both. "I will never let you go." And the moon, hanging heavy above the peaks, witnessed his oath as if it were the only truth that had ever mattered. 3 days passed in the shelter of stone and firelight. She didn't tell him her name until the fever broke. She was Mira, cast out from the southern packs for refusing a bonding she didn't consent to, exiled into winter with nothing but a tattered dress and the instinct to survive. She'd been walking toward the cliffs when she caught his scent on the wind, blood and curse and a loneliness so profound it mirrored her own. "I thought I was tracking another ghost," she said softly, sitting upright for the first time, the wound on her shoulder bandaged but healing with unnatural speed. There was something about Cale's presence that accelerated the mending, as if his oath had written itself into her flesh. Kyle watched her from across the fire, his frame still lean from years of subsisting on rage and minimal sustenance. The curse had carved him hollow, turning his once noble features into something angular and severe. But his eyes held the weight of a king who had learned to grieve. "I was ready to become one," he admitted, "ready to stop fighting the curse and let it finish what it started." "What curse?" She asked the question carefully, as if understanding that some truths required gentleness. He was quiet for a long time, watching the flames dance across the ancient stone walls. The cave they'd sheltered in was old, perhaps older than the kingdom itself. The fire bowls that burned without fuel suggested old magic, the kind that didn't answer to mortal commands. I was loved, Cale said finally, by a woman I couldn't protect. She was bound to another, a political marriage, a necessity of the crown. I knew it was wrong, but I loved her anyway, openly, without shame. When her husband found us together, he didn't kill us. That would have been mercy. He paused, his jaw tightening. Instead, he cursed us both. He bound my wolf in silver, fractured my mind, and left her with the knowledge that every moment we were together was slow poison. She chose to leave me. She chose exile, and I cursed her for choosing her own survival over our bond. Mira listened without interrupting, her gray eyes steady and without judgment. The curse feeds on that refusal, Kyle continued. On my inability to accept that love sometimes means letting go. Every winter, it grows stronger. Every winter, I come closer to losing myself entirely. The hunters today, they were here to end it mercifully because there's no kingdom that can bear an alpha king slowly going mad with grief and regret. But you didn't let them, Mira said softly. No, because you showed me something I'd forgotten. He looked at her directly then, and his gaze was so intense it was almost painful. You showed me that mercy isn't just about letting go. Sometimes it's about refusing to let someone disappear. Something passed between them in that moment. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people broken in different ways, finding each other in the dark. Over the next 3 days, Mira's wound continued to heal with impossible speed. There was something in the cave, some old magic, that seemed to respond to her presence. The fire burned brighter when she was near. The stones seemed to pulse with ancient warmth. On the 3rd night, as Cale watched her sleep by the firelight, he realized what was happening. She was a pathfinder. The legends spoke of them, Omegas born with the gift to navigate the spaces between worlds, to heal what was broken, to find what was lost. They appeared rarely, and when they did, they carried within them the ability to either anchor a cursed soul or break them entirely. His curse thrashed against her presence like a caged thing, recognizing in her the one key that might unlock it or destroy it completely. When Mira woke, she found him kneeling by the fire, his form trembling between human and wolf. "Don't," she whispered, understanding instinctively what was happening. "Don't fight it. Let me in." She moved to him, placed her small hands on his shoulders, and began to sing. The language was ancient, older than words. It was the sound of wind through winter forests, of ice cracking in spring thaw, of wolves calling to the stars. As she sang, the cave filled with a light that wasn't fire, and Cale felt the curse loosen its grip just slightly, like a vice slowly releasing its pressure. Not healing, not yet, but a ceasefire, a moment of peace that felt like grace. When she stopped singing, she collapsed against his chest, and he held her like she was the only real thing left in a world made of ghosts. "There's something else," he said into her hair. "Something I need to tell you. The oath I made, the one about never letting you go. It's more than words. When an alpha speaks a vow like that, it marks the bond. You'll feel it in time. A connection that ties you to me." Mira pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight like mirrors of molten silver. "Then we're bound?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "unless you reject it. Unless you choose to walk away while you still can." She didn't answer with words. Instead, she kissed him, soft and tender and absolute. And in that kiss, they both understood that rejecting this bond would require killing themselves, and even then, the other would likely follow. The moon rose high above the mountain, and inside the stone shelter, 2 broken souls began the slow work of learning how to be whole again. The hunters returned on the 7th day, but they didn't come alone. Kyle felt them first, a ripple of hostile intent moving through the forest like blood in water. He was outside the cave gathering wood when the scent hit him. Magic, old and heavy with purpose. Dark magic. "We need to leave," he said. Moving back into the cave where Mira was sitting by the fire, working her fingers through a tangle of thread. She looked up, reading the tension in his shoulders. "Now." "Who?" "The warlock who cursed me. He's found us." They ran deeper into the mountain, through passages that seemed to exist more in dream than in stone. Kale's knowledge of the caves was instinctive, born from 3 winters of hiding, but this time something was different. Behind them, the warlock's magic was tearing through the mountain like teeth, splintering rock, poisoning the air. They burst out into a chamber that took Mira's breath away. It was vast and impossibly beautiful, a cathedral of ice that seemed to have been carved by starlight itself. In its center, a pool of water so clear and still it looked like liquid glass, and reflected in it was the moon, even though they were deep underground. And standing at the pool's edge, waiting, was a woman made of silver and starlight. "The Pathfinder," the woman said, and her voice was the sound of wind through ancient forests. "At last." Mira stumbled forward, drawn by something she couldn't name. Kale reached for her, but the warlock's magic erupted through the ice chamber, forcing him to his knees. The curse screamed inside him, fighting the intrusion, and for a moment he was certain it would tear him apart. But Mira didn't hesitate. She turned to face the warlock's magic, and she opened herself to it, not to fight it, but to understand it. And as she did, something extraordinary happened. The silver markings along her spine began to glow. They spread across her skin like liquid moonlight, tracing patterns that looked almost like the constellations, and the cave filled with a light so pure and terrible that the warlock's magic shattered like glass. The warlock himself, a twisted figure of shadow and rage, let out a scream that echoed through the mountain. "Impossible!" he hissed, and Kale realized with horror that the warlock wasn't attacking to kill him anymore. He was attacking to capture Mira, to strip her power and use it for his own purposes. Kale shifted, his wolf erupting through him, and for the first time since the curse had taken hold, his form was perfect and terrible and whole. The silver no longer bound him. Somehow, in the presence of her power, the curse had transformed into something else, something that belonged to him instead of controlling him. He was between Mira and the warlock in a single leap, his jaws closing on nothing as the warlock dissolved into shadow and fled. The chamber fell silent. Slowly, Kale shifted back to human form, his breathing ragged. Mira stood with her hands still glowing, tears streaming down her face. Her eyes wide with shock. "What are you?" she whispered. "What are you?" Kyle countered gently, moving toward her. "That's the real question." The silver woman at the pool smiled, sad and knowing and ancient. "She is the Pathfinder," the woman said, "born to navigate the spaces between curse and redemption, rejection and belonging. She carries within her the map to every lost soul, and she is bound now to an Alpha King, which means she carries the power to either anchor him completely or destroy the curse entirely." "There's a difference?" Mira asked, her voice small and frightened. "Yes," the woman said. "Anchoring him means binding yourself to his fate, his struggles, his slow healing. It means love becomes a chain, beautiful and terrible. Destroying the curse means letting him go, sending him back to his kingdom, breaking the bond, allowing him to live without the weight of what he feels for you." Mira looked at Kyle, and in her eyes was the full weight of the choice she would have to make. "I need time," she said softly. "You have until the next full moon," the silver woman said. "Then the choice becomes permanent either way." And the pool began to drain into nothingness, and the woman faded like starlight dissolving into dawn, and Kyle and Mira were left alone in the chamber with only the echo of their choices and the terrible knowledge that love, sometimes, required the strength to let go. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. They returned to the cave, but something had shifted. The comfort that had bloomed between them over those first days had crystallized into something more complex, a weight of knowing what the other carried, what the other might lose. Cale tried to hide it, but Mira could feel it through their bond, the fear that if she chose to break the curse, she would also break him, the guilt that he was asking her to choose between his survival and her freedom. "Stop," Mira said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Stop feeling guilty. Stop torturing yourself with the mathematics of sacrifice." "I don't know how," Kyle said quietly. "I've spent 3 years running from guilt. I don't know how to sit with it and just breathe." "Then let me teach you," Mira said, "because I've had a lifetime of it." She told him then, everything she'd held back, how her own pack had rejected her not because she was weak, but because she refused to submit to their hierarchy, how the Alpha's son had wanted to bond with her, and when she'd said no, she'd been cast out as punishment, how she'd walked into the winter expecting to die, and instead had found him. "I was already broken," Mira said. "The rejection didn't break me. It just revealed that I was never meant to belong to them in the first place. And maybe—" She paused, struggling with the words. "Maybe I was never meant to belong to anyone. Maybe I was meant to choose myself." "Is that what you want?" Kyle asked, and the question cost him everything to ask. "To choose yourself?" "I don't know yet," Mira said honestly. "I need to understand what it would mean to choose you, not because I'm bound to you by magic, but because I actually want to." So they began to build something new. Not the desperate passion of 2 broken people clinging to survival, but something slower and more deliberate. They talked for hours, sitting in the firelight, sharing the details of their lives. Kyle spoke of the kingdom he'd been born to, the weight of the crown, the impossible choice between duty and love that had led to his curse. Mira spoke of her pack, of watching other Omegas submit themselves to hierarchies that diminished them, of the quiet strength it took to say no and accept the consequences. "What do you want?" Kyle asked her one night. "If the curse was gone, if the bond was broken, if you had no one depending on you, what would you want?" Mira was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. "To understand my gift," she said finally, "to know what it means to be a pathfinder, to help people navigate their own dark places without losing myself in them." She paused, "And maybe to choose a partner, not because I was bound to them by magic or hierarchy, but because I looked at them and thought, yes, this one is worth the risk." Kyle listened, and he understood that she hadn't said his name. She hadn't said yes to him specifically, but she also hadn't said no. On the 11th day, the warlock returned, but not to attack. Instead, he sent a messenger, a young woman with wolf's eyes and a scar that ran from temple to jaw. "My master offers a truce," the messenger said, standing at the cave's mouth where neither of them could fully shift if fighting became necessary. "He will lift the curse on one condition. The Pathfinder comes to him willingly and allows him to study her gift. In exchange, the Alpha King will be freed, and the warlock swears on the old magic that he will never pursue either of them again." Cale's wolf erupted at the very suggestion, but Mira held up a hand, silencing him. "No," she said simply. The messenger looked surprised. "You don't wish to be free of the bond?" "I wish to make my own choices," Mira said, "not because someone is offering me freedom in exchange for servitude. The bond is mine to keep or break. The warlock has no say in it." The messenger smiled then, sad and knowing, and Mira realized the woman was another pathfinder, abandoned by the warlock long ago. "Good," the woman said, "then you're stronger than I was. Hold to that." She turned to leave, then paused. "The warlock is growing desperate. He can feel his power waning. In 7 days, at the full moon, He'll make his last move. You should be ready." After she left, Kyle pulled Mira close. "Whatever you choose," he said, "I'll stand with you." "Even if I choose to break the curse?" Mira asked softly. "Even then," he said, "because choosing yourself is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen you do." And the moon rose higher, counting down the days until the full moon, until the moment when everything would be decided. The warlock's final move came not as violence, but as revelation. He flooded the mountain with visions, images of what Mira's life would look like if she stayed bound to Kale. She saw herself slowly losing the edges of her identity, absorbed into the role of Alpha Queen. She saw herself bearing children who would carry both his curse and her gift, children who would be hunted or revered but never simply loved. She saw the slow erosion of the woman she was becoming, worn away by duty and expectation. And she saw what would happen if she chose to break the curse. Kyle would be freed, yes, but he would also be alone. The curse had been woven into him so deeply that removing it would leave holes, spaces that needed filling. He would spend years rebuilding himself, learning to live without the burden that had defined him for so long. He might never fully recover. He might grow to resent her for the emptiness she'd created. The visions came in waves, each one more devastating than the last. Mira stood at the mouth of the cave as a storm raged outside, a supernatural storm born from the warlock's desperation and rage. Snow fell like ash, wind howled like the dying, and in the chaos of it all, she could feel her certainty fracturing. Kale found her there, and without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms. "I know what he's showing you," Kale said into her hair. "I'm seeing them too. Every way we could hurt each other, every way this could end in tragedy." "How are you not terrified?" Mira asked, her voice breaking. "I'm absolutely terrified," Kale said. "I'm more terrified than I've been in 3 years, because terror means I have something to lose, and I do. I have you." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and his eyes were clear and steady and full of something that looked like grace. "But here's what the warlock doesn't understand," Kale continued. "He shows us the worst possibilities because that's what his power thrives on: fear and doubt and regret. But he can't show us the best possibilities. He can't imagine a future where we choose each other consciously, deliberately, every single day. Where we build something not because magic demands it, but because we want to. He can't imagine love that isn't desperate, that isn't bound by curse or hierarchy or fate." "How can you be so sure?" Mira whispered. "Because I'm looking at you," Kyle said simply, "and you're still choosing to be here. That's not the curse talking. That's not desperation. That's you, deciding that maybe I'm worth the risk." The visions intensified, became almost unbearable, and Mira realized the warlock was making his final play. He was going to force her to choose right now, in this moment of maximum doubt. She closed her eyes and thought of the moment they'd met, her running toward a stranger with an arrow meant for him. She thought of the fever, and his hands bandaging her wound. She thought of the song she'd sung in the ice chamber, and the way he'd shifted, his curse transformed into something whole. She thought about what it meant to choose someone, not because they completed you, but because they challenged you to become more. And she began to sing, not the ancient language of the Pathfinders, but something new, something that was entirely her own. It was a song about rejection and survival, about the strength it took to say no and the courage it took to say yes. It was a song about love that wasn't chains but wings, that wasn't duty but devotion. As she sang, the vision shattered like ice in spring thaw. The warlock screamed, a sound of pure rage and despair, and the mountain trembled. But Mira didn't stop singing. She sang until the storm broke, until the snow stopped falling, until starlight broke through the clouds like silver water. And when the last note faded, the warlock was gone. Not destroyed, but defeated. broken. And in the aftermath, the curse, Cale's curse, simply dissolved. It didn't leave him broken or empty. Instead, it left him whole in a way he'd never been before. The weight was gone, but so was the refusal to accept his own capacity for healing. Cale stood in the starlight with his mate, and for the first time in 3 years, he could breathe without pain. The full moon rose, and with it came the choice that was no longer a choice at all. They stood together on the cliff where the hunters had first cornered Cale, where Mira had leapt into the path of a silver arrow. The cave was behind them, the mountain spread beneath them, like the whole world was theirs to name. "The warlock is gone," Cale said. "The curse is broken. The bond that ties us, it's entirely yours now. You can choose to keep it, or you can walk away. And I'll never follow. I swear it on the old magic." Mira looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a king, not an alpha, not a cursed soul in need of redemption. She saw a man who had suffered and survived, who had learned to grieve his own choices, who had chosen mercy when rage would have been easier. "I want to try," she said softly. "Not because I'm bound to you, not because the curse demanded it, but because I want to, because I look at you and I see someone becoming who he always should have been." "And the kingdom?" Cale asked. "If you choose me, you choose to become their queen. That's not a small thing." "Then we'll choose together," Mira said. "I'll be a queen who was rejected by her own pack, who knows what it means to be cast out. Maybe that's exactly what a kingdom needs." Cale smiled then, really smiled for the first time in 3 years, and it transformed his entire face into something young and hopeful and fierce. He took her hand, and they walked down from the cliff together as the first light of dawn broke across the frozen peaks. Behind them, the cave settled into silence, the ancient fire burning low, waiting for the next lost souls who would need shelter and healing. Like if you believe rejection can become destiny. The kingdom didn't know what to do with the Alpha King when he returned. He was supposed to be hollow-eyed and broken, consumed by the curse that had driven him into exile. Instead, he walked through the castle gates with a woman at his side, small and fierce and marked with silver that glowed faintly in the morning light, and his eyes held the clarity of someone who had looked into the abyss and chosen to look away. The court whispered. The nobles questioned. The elders demanded explanations. And Kyle, for the first time, told them the truth. He told them about the curse, about his refusal to accept his own capacity for change. He told them about the woman he'd loved and abandoned, about the guilt that had poisoned his throne. He told them about Mira, about what it meant to be saved by someone who didn't owe him anything. "She leapt in front of an arrow meant for me," Kyle said to his council, "not because she was bound to me by magic, but because she saw someone worth saving. And in doing so, she saved me in ways that have nothing to do with curses and everything to do with choice." The council exchanged glances. Finally, the eldest among them, a woman whose own life had been marked by rejection and hard choices, stood. "Then we accept her," the elder said, "not as a prize won by the Alpha King, but as a pathfinder who has chosen to walk this path. Let the kingdom bear witness to what happens when we choose mercy over power and healing over vengeance." But not everyone was satisfied. A delegation came from the southern packs, the pack that had cast Mira out. They demanded her return, claiming she was still bound to them by blood, that her rejection had been incomplete. Mira stood before them without fear. "I was rejected," she said calmly, "because I refused to submit to a hierarchy that didn't serve me. I was cast out into the snow to die. And I survived. I thrived. That rejection is now complete. I choose to sever every tie to your pack, to your alpha, to your claim on my life." She held up her hand, and the silver markings along her skin began to glow. The pack members felt it like a physical blow. The absolute severing of every bond, the deletion of her name from their records, the finalization of her exile. But this time, the exile was her choice, not theirs, and that changed everything. A year had passed since the mountain, and the kingdom had learned to breathe differently. Chaol stood in the throne room of a castle that had once felt like a cage, watching the morning light filter through windows of frosted glass. The silver that had once bound his curse was gone, but traces of it remained, not in his body, but in the way he moved, in the careful deliberation behind every decision. The curse had carved grooves into his soul, and those grooves would never fully smooth away. He'd learned to accept that. Mira was in the East Wing, meeting with another delegation of Omegas seeking sanctuary. She'd established the first refuge just 3 months after their return to the castle, a compound hidden in the foothills where Omegas who had been rejected, abused, or simply refused to submit could come to heal. The kingdom's elders had protested. The traditional alphas had raged. Chaol had listened to every argument and supported her anyway. It was the first real test of their rule, and they'd chosen each other over tradition. By evening, Mira returned to their chambers, a sprawling suite of rooms that overlooked both the mountains they'd come from and the kingdom stretched below. She was exhausted, her silver markings dim with fatigue, but her eyes held the fierce satisfaction of someone who had spent the day doing exactly what she was meant to do. 17 more, she said, collapsing into the chair by the fireplace. 17 Omegas seeking refuge. The safe houses are nearly full. We'll expand, Chaol said without hesitation. Send word to the Western Territories. I'll commission new construction, whatever resources you need. Mira looked at him, and there was still something in her expression that spoke of marvel, that she could ask and be given without negotiation or condition. The council won't like it, she said. They're already calling the refugees breeding grounds for rebellion. Let them call it that, Chaol said quietly. They called my love for a woman rebellion too. They were right then, and they're right now. The only difference is that this time, I'm choosing to stand on the side of what's right instead of what's comfortable. He moved to her, knelt before her chair, and took her hands. This small act, an Alpha King kneeling before an Omega, was still scandalous to the court. It would always be scandalous. But Chaol had stopped caring what scandalized people who measured worth by hierarchy instead of by heart. I want to show you something, he said. Will you come with me? They traveled by night, moving through secret passages that Chaol had learned as a boy, but hadn't used since before his exile. They emerged in the library, the oldest part of the castle, where records dating back centuries were kept. Chaol led her to a section that had been sealed off, gathering dust. These are the records of every woman who tried to refuse a bonding, Chaol said, running his fingers along the spines of ancient volumes. Every Omega who said no to an Alpha's claim. The official histories erased them, but the records are here. Hundreds of names. Hundreds of women who chose their own path even when it meant exile. Mira opened one of the books, and her eyes widened as she read. They're marked as disgraced, she whispered. All of them. Why are you showing me this? Because I want to restore them, Chaol said. I want to create a new record, a true history of the women who refused and why their refusal mattered. I want their names back. I want every Omega in this kingdom to know that choosing themselves isn't new, isn't radical. It's ancient. It's a legacy. Mira looked at him, and tears traced silver paths down her cheeks, literally silver, her pathfinder nature responding to emotion. You're changing everything, she said softly. We're changing everything, Chaol corrected. Together. 3 months later, they made the journey back to the mountain. The anniversary of the day Mira had leapt in front of the arrow had become significant in the kingdom, celebrated as the day when true redemption became possible. The court called it Pathfinder's Day, though Mira insisted the name should include Chaol's role in the transformation. It's not Pathfinder's Day, she'd said to the assembled nobles. It's the day of choice, Because it wasn't my sacrifice that changed things. It was both of us choosing to see each other's worth, and then choosing to build something real from that seeing. They traveled light. Just Kale, Mira, and a small guard who stayed in the foothills, while the two of them climbed to the cave alone. The mountain remembered them. The snow fell softer as they approached, as if the peaks themselves were welcoming them home. The cave mouth glowed with the ancient firelight, and as they entered, the flames rose higher, burning brighter than they had in centuries. Mira walked directly to the pool where she'd once seen her own reflection. But this time, when she looked into the water, she didn't see just herself. She saw the 17 Omegas who were safe in their refuges. She saw the record of names being restored, histories being rewritten. She saw a future branching out in directions she hadn't imagined when she was walking into the snow, expecting to die. "What do you see?" Kyle asked from behind her. "Consequences," Mira said softly. "One choice leading to another, leading to another. A woman refusing a bonding creates a refuge. A refuge becomes a network. A network becomes a movement. And it all started because I was stubborn enough to say no." "It all started," Kale corrected gently, "because I was broken enough to let you say yes." They sat by the fire then, and Kyle began to tell her things he'd never shared before. He told her about the woman he'd loved in the kingdom, about the moments of tenderness they'd stolen between political obligations and duty. He told her about the day her husband had taken her away, about the curse that had followed, about 3 years of running that had felt like drowning in slow motion. "I was dying," he said, "even before I fled to the mountains. I was dying because I believed that love was something to be ashamed of, that desire was weakness, that an alpha king wasn't allowed to break. And when I finally did break, I tried to do it alone." He took her hand, and his grip was firm, grounded. "You showed me that breaking isn't death," he continued. "It's transformation. The curse didn't make me into a monster. It revealed what I already was, a man who needed to learn how to choose differently. And I couldn't have learned that alone." Mira squeezed his hand. "I was dying too," she said softly. "Not the way you were, but I was dying nonetheless. I was learning to believe that saying no meant I deserved to be cast out, that my refusal was a flaw instead of a strength. I was internalizing the rejection, making it part of my identity." She paused. "Then I met you, and you taught me something different. You taught me that sometimes leaping toward danger isn't stupidity. Sometimes it's exactly the kind of courage the world needs." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the crackle of the ancient fire. "The records," Mira said finally, "the women whose names you're restoring. Do you think it will change anything?" "I think," Kyle said carefully, "that it's changed already. There's an Omega in the Western Territories who refused a bonding last month. Instead of being exiled, she came to your refuge. The local Alpha tried to fight it, but the king's law now supports her choice. And it worked because she knew there was a place for her, a record of women like her." He turned to face her completely. "Every choice we make creates ripples," he said. "You chose to leap in front of an arrow. I chose to accept help instead of dying alone. Together, we chose to build something that values choice above hierarchy. And now, other people are making different choices because they see that it's possible. That's redemption, Mira. Not being perfect, not erasing the past, but creating a future where the mistakes we made don't have to be repeated." Outside the cave, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Kyle and Mira walked to the cave's mouth and stood looking out over the kingdom spread beneath them. "Do you ever regret coming back?" Mira asked. "You could have stayed here, hidden, lived out your life in the mountains." "No," Kyle said immediately, "because my redemption isn't hiding from the world. It's facing it. It's standing in that throne room and telling the court that I was wrong. It's building sanctuaries for people I used to ignore. It's marrying a woman the old hierarchy says I shouldn't have married. He paused. That's where my redemption lives, in the choices that scare me, that require me to change. Mira leaned against him, and they stood together as the light failed and the stars emerged. I want to come back here, Mira said, every year, on this day. I want to remember who we were, so we don't forget who we're becoming. Then we will, Kale said. I swear it. And as if in response to his oath, the ancient fire in the cave flared bright enough to illuminate the entire mountain, bright enough to be seen from the kingdom below. The people who witnessed it, shepherds and night travelers, farmers and guards, stopped and looked up at the light burning in the high peaks, and they understood in their bones that something sacred was happening above them, something that spoke to redemption and choice, and the fierce, difficult work of becoming better than you were before. Kale and Mira stayed in the cave until the moon rose directly overhead, until the stars seemed close enough to touch, and then, hand in hand, they descended the mountain toward the kingdom they would spend the rest of their lives transforming, one choice at a time. The ancient fire burned on in the cave, tended by magic older than memory, waiting for the next lost souls who would need shelter, waiting to witness the next redemption that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with choice. And in the years that followed, the story of the fragile Omega and the cursed king spread across the kingdom and beyond, carried by pathfinders and bards, whispered in refugees and council chambers, until it became something larger than any single couple's love story. It became proof that redemption was possible, that rejection could become destiny, that the most broken people sometimes contained within them the seeds of the most profound transformations. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive. End of the fragile Omega, extended redemption.